Chapter 5: The Ferrocell. It's pretty gosh darn cool. But what the hell is happening inside of that thin layer of ferrofluid? Is it simply a glorious holographic novelty, or does it have any profound scientific realizations that can be extracted from the phenomena? Well, I say we hash it out right now with our new logical framework. We can use this controversy as our first exercise in solving any mystery of the universe, within a single retroductive brainstorming session. There may be no other better example of the power that this new logical framework brings to the table. Once we easily solve the physics of the ferrocell, you will see the extraordinary truth behind the most fundamental logic system ever discovered. In fact, we are about to solve an additional mystery that no one in the history of the published world has ever been able to truly understand until now. And we're going to accomplish this task in a matter of minutes. So what do we know about the light patterns displayed with a ferrolens device? 1. It is very obvious that there is a holographic projection of a compressed torus being displayed. 2. When you take a closer look, these obviously aren't the normal lines associated with magnetism that manifest from using iron filings on a flat surface. There are many configurations that do not overlay to match the magnetic field lines. But then there are certain orientations, where the light pattern does match the magnetic field exactly. What could possibly be the cause of this geometric light display that seems to be in and out of alignment with the intersecting magnetic field? In the previous segment, we studied the universal geometric logic of the torus knot. It is the fundamental configuration for motion, creation, and destruction in the universe. It is the shape that all extruded shapes are born from and is the mediator between the pressure and tension forces of a closed boundary fluid dynamics system. The torus is also the map that gives you information about the shape of its container and the type of dynamic flow structure trapped within its boundary. So let's take a look at our torus map once again. As you can see, the inner vortex tube is associated with tension, and this is the mechanism that governs the concept we call magnetism. The outer bubble shell represents the force of pressure, and is locked tight around the closed system that is captured within. The outer shell structure is a boundary that creates a new compartmentalized system which resets the pressure scale back to its default distribution as the virtual square and cube grid formations. This is a reset within the boundary and can be best visualized as a harmonic circuit of flow that is acting as the compromise between being at complete rest and turbulent flow. It is the hybrid form which represents the concept of equilibrium. Pressure is the mechanism of gravitation, and this means that the outer shell represents the field of gravity. The shell boundary is responsible for keeping the closed system pressurized centripetally toward the center. The column of tension that represents the vortex tube in the center of the torus is the support column for the outer shell and keeps it propped up. Together, these two geometries create a structural stability. So now that we have identified the outer shell of the torus as the gravitational field, we can now make a simple inference in regards to what the significance of the ferrocell could possibly be. Anyone can clearly see that the ferrocell is projecting a torus structure from different angles, depending on the orientation of the magnetic field that intersects the ferrofluid plane. You can clearly see the intersecting lattice structure of the outer shell of the torus being displayed. And since the outer shell is directly related to the pressure force of gravity, we can now easily understand that what we are seeing projected from the ferrocell is the gravitational field. Yes, that is right. For the first time in the history of mankind, we have uncovered the knowledge that gravitational fields are real and now understand how to detect and view them. Isn't that unbelievable? This revolutionary new physics framework based on geometric logic of the torus knot has allowed us to form a probable hypothesis in a matter of minutes for a puzzle that has stumped everyone who has ever tried to solve it. Even those who were only a step or two away from completing the loop of understanding, like Johannes Kepler and Albert Einstein. Great job, Tim Vanderelli. Thank you for inventing the ferrocell. You have made an invaluable contribution toward the advancement of scientific understanding. In this image, you can see that this viewing system is showing you one plane of gravitational warping, just like the grid plane used to visualize the theory of general relativity and the contours of space. In fact, this is the exact representation of that concept. However, there's a little bit more to unfold before we understand the ferrocell in a full circle manner. There's still something missing, because space cannot be a single 2.5D plane. It doesn't make any logical sense, and this is certainly the reason why everyone suspects that relativity is nearly accurate, yet there is just one small thing that seems to be missing from the equation. It needs that one last undiscovered variable to tie it all together. Fortunately, the ferrocell provides an important clue to illuminate this missing holy grail variable of scientific discoveries. The function of the ferrocell that provides the most insight seems to have gone completely unnoticed in the mainstream and alternative scientific communities. Once you realize that the projections of the ferrocell are all perspective views of the structure of the torus, you can begin to visualize the orientation of the torus from its partial imprint on the ferro lens. Once you develop your geometric eye, you should be able to notice one interesting factor in regards to how the torus hologram is distributed. If the magnet is oriented on top of the ferrocell, you will see the perspective of the light grid is from within the large chamber of the torus. It is the view from the inside. When you place the magnet underneath the ferrocell, you will see the torus structure as if you are looking at it from the outside view. These two perspectives represent both halves of the gravitational field. Gravity is the gaseous pressure system that is created and trapped in between these sheets of fluid space. Space is a system of pressure sleeves. A sleeve of at least two planes is created when a mass has to travel through a fluid. Planes are created when a projectile must split open, or perforate a fluid boundary to create an available path of travel through it. This is the nature of a fluid medium. Wherever you find a solid plane, there is a fluid plane stacked on top of it. A solid plane is always the outer shell of a fluid boundary. A fluid plane is the thin sheet of fluid in between two boundary planes, solid or fluid. Planes are created at the boundary between two objects, and each object has its own surface boundary, and you guessed it, with a thin layer of fluid in between there as well. A single plane can be straight, curved, curled, twisted, or rolled up like a carpet, but the moment a plane is folded to a crease, it becomes multiple planes. This is only important from the fluid perspective, as geometric angles of a container will always hinder the flow of a fluid and cause pooling. As we discovered in part 1, stillness is not a desirable characteristic for a hydrogen-based fluid entity. Stillness eventually becomes solid. So if the torus is just a holographic projection in the ferrocell, what is actually happening to cause these phenomena? The ferrocell consists of an important principle that seems to be undiscovered in its true significance. It is a fluid plane only, due to the very shallow depth of fluid that is trapped in between two surface boundaries. It has just enough thickness for the small magnetic particles to align in a 2D style configuration, just like iron filings on a flat surface. So let's take a look at the geometry and apply our knowledge of the flattened torus projection. Whenever you detect a flattened torus shape, it is an indication that the field is a thin fluid plane. In order to explore the path of light travel in the ferrocell, we need to explore the framework for this configuration. A polar grid is the proper frame for the flattened torus structure. It is the lattice geometry that determines the available flows of electromagnetism. A polar grid consists of equipotential lines, which are indicated by the concentric circles, and isopotential flow lines, which are the lines that are diverging from, or converging toward the center, depending on the direction of flow. Now if we connect all of the vertices by placing an X in each cell area, you can easily see that it creates a flattened torus, from a polar view. The 3D spherical torus has been projected as a cone or dome-shaped torus. And this makes sense, because spheres, domes, cones, and cylinders are all proportional and transformable forms of each other. Two cones or domes are equal to one sphere, just like the two sides of the ferrocell projection. Combining both halves of the field will reveal the complete surrounding geometry pattern. All you need to do to distort this stereographic field is to move the center circle, which signifies the magnetic pole. This alignment is the focal point of the geometry, while the outer ring of the equipotential lines will maintain a more static position. It is essentially the same concept as an eyeball in 2D, and if you add a second eye next to it, the polar centers will attract toward each other in order to bond at a common focal point, called perspective. The ferrocell is showing you how a magnetic field affects the gravitational field of a compressed fluid plane, which are the boundaries of the lanes of flow, for all of space, at all scales. The ferrocell is equivalent to a parallel surface scanner for a gravitational field plane. This conversion of a folded 3D topology to a flat 2D surface pattern is called a stereographic projection. If you were using a 3D modeling software, like Blender, the reverse technique would be called UV mapping. This would fold the stereographic skin layer around a matching 3D wire mesh frame. However, we have not yet introduced the light into our equation. So what do these vertices of intersection indicate? Well, let's take the equipotential and the isopotential lines, and imagine these extruded upwards toward the direction of view, and then consider these to be the tallest ridges of the ferrofluid configuration, while the X in each cell indicates an inverted pyramid-shaped valley, where the deepest point is in the middle. You know, X marks the spot, right? Think of these X vertices as grooves or folds that create a recession below the lens surface. When you compare this configuration to all other observed behavior of ferrofluid, you can see that the normal configuration of this non-compressed ferrofluid is literally inverted inside the ferrolens. It is just like looking at the ferrofluid arrangement from underneath, which would be from the perspective of the magnet. This brings us to another discovery I have made, which is a concept that if you compress a fluid cell to have a flat plane, it will invert its cellular geometry from parabolic to hyperbolic, and vice versa when played out in reverse. This is one of many examples that are directly related to the Janibekov effect, or what I have coined as flipping the wing nut. When I discovered this effect also occurs here on Earth, I knew it had to be explained and incorporated into a true understanding of the universe. Of course, I will discuss this subject in much more detail at a later point, but it has everything to do with compressed planes of inertia. I just wanted to give you an example of a fundamental mechanism of evidence regarding the perspective flipping of motion and planes. If we imagine each LED light is placed on the isopotential lines where these intersect with the equipotential outer ring, we can visualize the path of the light. Let's begin with just one LED position and see what happens. When you turn on the light, you can see that it will immediately curve down into the X-shaped sunken areas to the left and right of the isopotential line. As we follow this line into the next cell, you can imagine that the stream of light is traveling down the ridge, to the middle of the X, and back up the other ridge line, repeating this again in the next cell. You can't see the depth of the geometry from this point of view, but if you were to turn it sideways you could see that it is essentially an up and down zigzag, or sine wave motion, which is always a good indication of electromagnetic identification. As we follow the line further, we can see that it curls around the magnetic pole and back to the original position, creating a teardrop shape. When we overlay this at every isopotential line, we get the complete torus configuration of the polar view projection on the ferro lens that traces all of the X-shaped vertices we added to the cells. This next part is pretty interesting. If you know anything about how holograms are created, you should immediately recognize that I raise a most logical point with the next statement. In order to create a hologram, you must split light into two or more different paths that have to come back together to create displacement interference. That is a requirement and is the main mechanism that defines a holographic projection. Therefore, if a theory does not account for this requirement, it is an incomplete theory of the ferrocell. As you can see in our diagram here, each LED light will split into two paths and one will follow the ridge to the right while the other goes left. There are two streams that create the teardrop, and these are going in the opposite direction from each other. From the centered 2D view, there is no interference between the streams and your line of sight. As you begin to turn your angle from the centered view, the two streams of light begin to destructively interfere, then constructively, and the cycle repeats until your point of view is parallel to the plane and out of sight. As you can see from this less compressed ferrofluid, in order for the light to be utilizing the geometry of the ridges and valleys, it would need to be traveling on the oil surface of the ferrofluid. That is where light thrives. It is a smooth surface traveler. You know this to be true once you hear it aloud. I will have a whole segment on light and how to truly see it for what it is. It was certainly one of the most difficult concepts to unfold completely. But I have found the most intuitive way to visualize this entity, where it can be understood in real terms. To further provide evidence of my inverted ferrofluid geometry claim, you can easily see in this image that when the ferrofluid is on the other side of a transparent barrier, it has now inverted and is facing the opposite direction from the viewer. If you were to flatten this jar into a sleeve, like the Ferrocell, it would flatten and compress the spiky side as well, creating a double-sided geometric inversion. Flattening a plane of an object is equivalent to compression. Additionally, it has been found that if you spread a thin layer of ferrofluid on the back of one panel of glass only, it makes an ever clearer and more defined ferrolens. This is because the ferrofluid on the back side is only compressed on the viewing side and is able to achieve its normal spiky nature going away from view. It is increasing the depth of the inverted cones from the viewing angle, therefore increasing the extrusion of the holographic projection as well. The light is not reflecting off of particles within the ferrofluid oil skin, as some have hypothesized. The light is an artificial holographic electromagnetic grid that is laid over the contour of a gravitized plane. Attaching a visible grid to the surface of a warped plane will show you its shape. The artificial light grid of the Ferrocell is showing you the possible flow lines for the electromagnetic streams introduced into the system. The entity of electromagnetism lives and flows in the folds, or cracks between planes, and I can't wait to show you how literal this statement truly is. Whenever you see the hologram of a torus geometry formation, you can be certain that a magnetic field is intersecting a compressed fluid plane, aka a gravitational field. But how can we actually begin to prove that this Ferrocell assessment is relevant to the reality of nature? Well, holy shit. Boy, do I have a fantastic treat for you. Hallelujah. Once upon a time, about a year ago, I was having an active brainstorming session to further visualize the geometric logic of the fluid planes concept when I suddenly realized that our atmosphere is essentially a single looped fluid plane, trapped in between the ground and the bottom of the cloud shelf in the sky. I wondered how I might be able to utilize the Earth's lower atmospheric ring as a Ferrocell-type device of the larger scale, which actually sounds completely insane as I say it aloud. But then I realized that rainbows, sunsets and lightning seem to be the types of plasmatic and holographic effects you might encounter if you were inside of a Ferrocell fluid gap. Then when you start thinking about the auroras at the poles, it begins to get a bit eerie. I did not think of a viable experiment at that time, but it gave me the leads I needed to be on the lookout for additional clues and connections. Not long after, I was looking at some videos I took, using a technique that I call stereoscopic extrusion of the field of the sun. By chance, I had another image of a Ferrocell open on a different computer screen, and I suddenly noticed an uncanny resemblance between two images that seemed to confirm my logical hunch. I completely expected to be correct, yet I was still surprisingly shocked. Not only was the geometry a perfect match, the hologram has much thicker depth for projection extrusion than a Ferrocell and reveals great additional insights into the configurations of reality, and how fluid space folds around different shaped objects. I still cannot believe I found a Ferrocell in the sky, created by a projection of the sun's gravitational field, on a flat plane, just feet above my head. Finding this connection between the sun's cell and the Ferrocell adds a very profound realization to the confirmation of this fluid plane discovery. Are you ready for this? I hope you are sitting down, so you can stand up, and sit back down again. Now go lie down, stand back up, then paddy whack jack rabbit smack somebody in the ass and give a dog a bone, because this is a game-changing realization that is so incredibly mind-blowing, it will rock the world completely. What comes next is a realization so simple and obvious that once the cat is out of the bag, it cannot be contained again. So, buckle the fuck up. Here we go. We'll be right back after this important message from our sponsor. This program has been brought to you by light. Let there be light. It's gravity's way of saying hello. And it's waving at you. Yes, you heard that correctly. Light is the elusive gravitational wave that we have never been able to observe before. Suddenly, the awareness of identity allows you to see an object for the first time. Once an object is in conscious view, you can easily begin to identify its traits. Additionally, it would appear that we have found the ultimate origin of intended metaphor as a mechanical representation of the fundamental truth that lies within the feeling of irony, in the commonly used phrase. It was in front of our face this whole time. Isn't that lovely? I know this is a lot to take in. But it's true. And it makes all the sense in the world after it's unfolded. I will cover all of these concepts in much greater detail, as my Logic of Science series continues. In this segment, I have introduced some plausible and logical starting points that illuminate a few of the biggest mysteries that the standard model has never solved. 1. What is a gravity field? 2. What in the Sam hell is a gravity wave? 3. What is missing from the theory of general relativity? In the next part of this series, I am going to prove to you, without a doubt, that this assessment is absolutely dead on the money and very simple to connect the dots, once you have identified the components. This is why the framework of finding the simplest starting point of the relative perspective is so effective. As we learned in part 1, perspective is a quality of an entity or an object, and always has a geometric attachment. Perspective equals geometry, and this is the fundamental logic base for the framework of everything. This method allows you to identify objects first and begin to assign characteristics, which is a quality of its behavior of motion. Once you have the objects of a system and their behavior identified, you simply apply the logic of the torus knot, and you can find the correct geometric overlay. In this case, we used the torus logic to identify gravity fields and gravity waves for the very first time. We are the champions. Honestly though, this is child's play. In my unfoldings over the past few years, I have been able to discover the entire mystery behind mathematics, exactly what it means, its origin, and how to apply it to be consistent with the nature of reality. I have solved the Riemann hypothesis, the mystery of prime numbers, and many other unsolved problems in mathematics. I have been able to discover the real significance of the Mandelbrot set and its fundamental seat at the table, what they call dark matter and dark energy, and last but not least, I have been able to unify the concepts of relativity and quantum mechanics into one extraordinarily weird, yet satisfying conclusion that most of us already observe on a daily basis. This discovery is the entire reason I created this series, and no one has ever made this observation before. Not like this. It is the one thing Ken Wheeler has not been able to realize that would easily convert his impossible to understand terminology into simple layman's terms that a child could understand. The more and more I unfolded, the more I have realized that he has literally unraveled it as far as it can possibly go, in the most accurate manner, without being able to describe what it all truly means. He did not find the entity. But I did, and I can now easily describe the entity of our universe in a single hyphenated word. This discovery renders the concepts of relativity and quantum mechanics to be obsolete terms, designated for incomplete framework theories of the past. Stay tuned. I promise you, it doesn't get any better than this.